welcome to the Body Oriented Coaching Way event, the first of its kind today. And I'm Nathan Blair. I'm the founder of the Somatic School, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about myself a little later. I'll give you a kind of tell you a bit more about my story. For now, I'm the founder of the Somatic School. We train coaches in something called Body Oriented Coaching, which is what we're going to be talking all about today. And whether you're a coach or not, you're very much in the right place. You don't have to be a coach to be here, nor to participate in any of our training. And I'll share a bit more later on about me and my journey. That's kind of part of this event. For now, it'd be great to hear from some of you. So this event is a little different. Like I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who were here, we normally host an event that's available to the public, entirely free to attend, which is called the Online Introduction to Body Oriented Coaching. We didn't have one scheduled this week, so we thought we'd try an experiment, and that is this event. And for this event today, I thought it might be fun to share a little bit of the kind of origin story of this particular modality, Body Oriented Coaching. I'm not normally hosting the other event, so it's a kind of opportunity to share a little bit of my story. It'll give you an opportunity to hear who you're with today for the remainder of this hour. And I'd like this bit to also be interactive if possible. So what would be really cool, and a little experiment as well, is to see maybe throughout, as I'm sharing my story, just to notice any moments of resonance or in any particular details that you relate to personally. And maybe if you feel happy to, maybe you might drop that into the chat. So just an invitation to just share that in the chat as we go along in real time, and then I can circle back to those at the end and maybe pick up on a few of those. And either way, I think it's a great opportunity to kind of get a sense of some of my own personal journey, but also our similarities, I imagine. Cool. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned, my name's Nathan Blair. I'm the founder of the Somatic School, and I sort of almost hesitate to say the creator of Body Oriented Coaching, because at this point, after so many years, it feels as though it's had the input and the shaping of the people that train with us and our trainers, and so it's no longer my own. I wouldn't say so. Having said that, it certainly began with me, and so here's a little bit about me. I guess when I was if I go right back, when I was a kid and when I was a child, I was always a very sensitive child, and actually would often be described as sort of oversensitive and that sort of thing, and maybe some of you can relate to that. That sense of almost being just feeling like overwhelmed at sort of sensory experience. I was always very my emotions were kind of very close to the surface. It wouldn't necessarily be crying or things like that, but it's just a sensitive child. And I think, growing up, one of the things, well, I'll come to this later, but I suppose one of the things I've discovered is actually the gifts of that sensitivity, right? So where actually something I previously thought of as perhaps a weakness, can actually be one of our greatest strengths. So I'll kind of come to that in a moment. But one of the things I'll mention is that I was actually going back through some old sort of like school reports, and I have some old, in amongst this pile were some medical reports and things like that. And I remembered something that I hadn't thought about in a very long time, which is at the age of 8, I actually had a occupational therapist come into school to help me with motor coordination, or kind of fine motor coordination difficulties. So in other words, I was very, very clumsy. I was kind of slightly off balance, malcoordinated. I was just rubbish at football. That was a pain point growing up in the UK for me. It was difficult not to play with the other boys playing football, but I just found that sort of thing really hard at that young age. And I remember that this lovely woman who was the occupational therapist used to come in and help me. I would climb on kind of these cushy, cushion bricks and things like that. I would squeeze things. I practice writing, because I could struggle to grip the pencil and things. And I'd actually forgotten about this until I read this report. And I have a theory that this might have been where my journey with somatics began. Like I have a theory that actually at the age of 8, I was being encouraged to actively during these sessions to really bring conscious awareness to my body, to notice how I was moving, to see how it felt, to grip tighter, grip looser, you know, to become aware of how I was moving in space. So what you might call like those proprioceptive skills and senses. And I have a theory that that's probably where body awareness became the origin of my kind of beginning to build conscious awareness of my body in moment to moment. Of course, we're all, you could say I don't know if it's fair to say we're all, but quite typically the majority of us are born being fully sensory sensate beings, right? And I think you know, along the way, it can be easy for us to be to disconnect or get out of touch, which is a slight play on words as well, you know, out of touch with ourselves. But for me, I think that may have been the beginning of me getting back in touch. I remember when I was a little older, I used to be very aware of my posture, how I held myself, and how the difference between me kind of having my chest up, my chin high, might change the way I actually felt about myself. So my self-esteem, like I remember reading in this report that actually these difficulties with motor sensors, etc., were factoring into affecting my self-esteem and my confidence. So I think that I began to work with my body to actually help improve my confidence just by how I was being in my body. Fast forward a little bit further, I was a young teen. Again, to sort of sense it reflects my sensitivity, but I actually planned to get the word empathy tattooed on my arm. Thank God I didn't. I think I probably would have regret this, but that gives you an idea of the kind of teenager I was. And around that time, in the UK, we have some exams called GCSEs. So around the time of my GCSEs, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or today, more specifically ADD. But the umbrella term ADHD is now what's used more commonly today. And it was, I took medication up for this up until my mid-20s, when I began to sort of search for more natural ways to manage what I at the time understood as the symptoms of ADHD. I actually discovered a book called The Mindfulness Prescription for ADHD, which I can type into the chat here, just the title. And here's another little description for ADHD. Here's another little thing that I discovered recently. And so I thought, hey, why not read that again and see what new insights I get as an adult? Because I was in my early 20s, so I suppose I was a young adult, but I wanted to see if I got a different perspective on it. And it turns out that it's entirely based on a science that is has fully influenced the body-oriented coaching modality, which is interpersonal neurobiology. And I was fascinated to see it at that early stage, because that's a relatively emerging field of scientific research that contains 20 odd different fields, and looks at where the findings of these different research schools of research coalesce. So you've got like sociology, neuroscience, biology, mathematics, and they look at where all of these different research findings kind of coalesce and share similar findings. And what it does is it begins to paint a very integrated picture of the human being, rather than these siloed areas of science. So actually, the mindfulness prescription for ADHD perhaps was one of the early introductions to a science that really focused on the human as an integrated whole. And so in my early 20s, I was absolutely fascinated in that. And so I actually stopped taking medication. I know that medication is very helpful for a lot of people, but for me, it wasn't the solution. And through mindfulness, and then later through more embodied practices, I really began to experience my life very differently to before then. And since then hadn't used any medication for ADHD, and feel that I have a good life, you know. But you know, that the diagnosis can be very empowering for some, disempowering for others, and I think it's just different for each of us. So we've got to find our own way with that. And I see that Sean there, you've written, I wonder if I have it. Yeah, there's a lot of adult diagnosis that's happening at the moment. One more little thing that I found recently, and this is quite interesting because it kind of lines up with my particular view on ADHD. I discovered that my actual diagnosis was given shortly after I'd actually experienced a mugging, and had been experiencing a lot of high anxiety. And Gabor Mate has a perspective on ADHD. There's a book of his called Scattered Minds, that these various diagnoses and pathologies sort of have their roots in trauma. And so I thought, from my own experience, it kind of lines up with that quite well. And so I think that that's very interesting avenue for exploration. It also connects to somatics, though isn't the whole of somatics, which is something we'll talk about a bit later. So so moving on a little, I studied psychology, and one of the things I found myself doing was moving away from the psychologies of disease, disorder, and dysfunction towards an understanding of human potential, you know, what really helps people flourish and thrive. You know, I mentioned before that I'd realized that my sensitivity at this point, after exploring mindfulness and body practices, that what I thought was a weakness could actually be my greatest strength. And that as individuals, I began to feel quite deeply that we're not broken and we don't need to be fixed. You know, that's my own philosophy. If it aligns with yours, great. If not, take what you like and leave the rest. But for me, I found myself very drawn to psychologies that supported that particular perspective. And I ended up, I think partly for that reason, training as a coach. Shortly after university, I trained as a coach, because coaching, you could say, is operationalizing this belief in potential and this idea of that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And again, we'll come back to that point a little bit later on. But this is where I really got into the work of coaching. Coaching as defined by the International Coach Federation, the Association for Coaching. Coaching is typically a non-directive, person-centered, collaborative, co-creative way of working that really helps to empower clients to find answers and solutions within themselves to whatever irking them, or whatever goals or visions they have for their life. And so coaching just felt like a fit. As a coach, non-verbal communication with my clients always felt really important to me. And I wanted to become more skilled at leveraging what I felt was a really powerful dimension to the work I was doing with my clients. However, at the time, nearly every coaching program that I participated in, and I participated in a lot, it's pretty much, you know, I'd work and spend my money on coach training when other people might have been going on holidays and things like that. I did a lot of coach training, and found that the somatic dimension, or the bodily aspects, were touched on very lightly, if at all. And so all the schools that were training that just didn't feel like they aligned with me at the level of, at the kind of values, in a value sense. Maybe a little too masculine for my liking. Maybe a little bit more results driven or leadership focused. And these things weren't quite what I was looking for. So I actually turned my attention towards the field of body psychotherapy. And it was there that I really found the skill set that I was looking for. A skill set that, for me specifically, I was looking for a way of working that was about deep listening, or like an embodied kind of listening, receptivity, a sense of following and flow, these kinds of qualities that worked with the kind of the what I like to call the second conversation. You've got the conversation that's happening at the verbal level, and then there's the somatic level. An organization I used to work at used to describe it in those terms, and I really like that idea that there's always multiple conversations happening at the same time. There's this verbal one, and then there's what we communicate with our bodies. So I found that in body psychotherapy, training and focusing, Hakomi, authentic movement. I did some Gestalt training. And I started to go deeper into interpersonal neurobiology, embodied cognition, and somatic psychology. And so for me, the field of somatics really encompassed everything that I felt was fascinating about what makes us human. And the Somatic School was born out of a desire to essentially create the coach training that I'd been searching for. And so that's what brings us to today, present moment. There's a little bit about me. And I suppose in some ways, kind of the being that birthed this. But let's have a look and see in the chat, see what we've got. Evelina, for me, mindfulness was a gateway to somatics and the connection to the body. Exactly. I say exactly because that was exactly the same experience I had. So that's great to hear that, Evelina. Rina, I also consider myself to be a sensitive and an empath, right? Yeah, so whatever language you use, I think that's I'm sure I could describe myself similarly in similar terms. That's awesome, and great to hear that resonates with you. And Catherine, diagnosed last year at the age of 39. I think there's a crossover as well with CPTSD, complex PTSD, and agree there may be trauma linked to ADHD too. Very interested in somatic work for both of these conditions and experiences. Yeah, brilliant. Excellent. Great. So wonderful to hear a little bit about the resonances there. And there's a little bit about me. We're going to move on now into the rest of the event, which really is a bit of a kind of deep dive. Thank you, Sean. A deep dive into and a kind of opportunity for us all to geek out a bit. If you're willing and open, if you fancy it, we're going to geek out a little bit on all things somatic coaching, specifically somatic coaching. Actually, just by a show of hands, has anybody here been to our online introduction to body-oriented coaching? Either by a show of hands, or you can type in the chat. Who has actually attended that event? Yeah, okay, a few of you. Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Nice, everyone. Lovely. Okay, cool. So quite a few of you have attended, and a lot of you haven't. Absolutely fine. Just to give you a distinction between these, and I'll share the details of that event a bit later in case you want to come. It's also entirely free to attend. This event is, you could say, is a bit more of the what of body-oriented coaching, and in a sense, that event talks a little bit more about some of the seas we're swimming in, the world of somatics, a bit more broadly speaking, and a kind of exploration of that, a little bit of experiential work as well. So like a little kind of taster or flavor of some of the body-oriented coaching skills. And this event is a bit more of the what. So what is body-oriented coaching? What is it actually? You know, and excuse me, sorry, the other event speaks a little bit more about the how. How might you become a body-oriented coach, or how does the training look in the structure of that and things like that. So that information is also available on the website. But just to give you an idea, we're going to be together exploring some of the underpinning philosophies such as somatics, the psychology of somatics. We'll be looking at some of the theoretical kind of framework like body-mind therapy and process thought, process thinking philosophy. We're talking a little bit about coaching and how this fits in here, because many people are familiar with the idea of somatic therapies. Fewer are familiar with what somatic coaching is. There's good reason for that, I imagine, and we'll talk about that when we get to that point. Then we'll talk a little bit about the tenets of body-oriented coaching, sort of what's at the heart of this approach. And then a meta model. I want to share with you a meta model for integrative practice. Now, this is a map, you could say, of how we might build an integrative framework like body-oriented coaching. So hopefully you walk away today with something that may help you actually kind of craft and build your own unique approach to working with your clients in such a way. It'll also help break down a bit clearer what it is that we do, and so you'll have a good idea about if this is something that you'd like as a kind of a next step in your learning journey. For most of you here, I imagine if you're interested in working with others and helping professions, I don't know a single helping professional who's not a lifelong learner, and so hopefully this will help you understand how this may fit into the bigger picture of your learning journey over your lifetime. So let's get into it. So somatics. Can I just check actually with everyone, how's the pace here? How are we doing for pace? Are we good? I'm mindful of the time that we've got. It's an hour. Yeah. Let me know. So want to make sure we fit everything in. Yeah, great. Okay, then I'll keep going. Cool. So we're going to start off. The first stop on our bus today is somatics. So I'll be your bus driver on this magic mystery tour of all things body-oriented coaching, and we stop off first of all at the field of somatics, modern psychology, timeless roots. So let's get into it. So first up, somatic psychology. So somatic psychology, I've written here, is nothing new and always innovating. Somatic psychology, you could say, has its roots truly in something that doesn't really even need to be given a name. And that is simply human experience. The fact that we are sensate beings, and that even our sense of self is a kind of a culmination of our moment by moment experiences as we're experiencing that through our entire organism. There are well-documented examples of First Peoples and indigenous practices and traditions that are absolutely rooted in working with this idea of the human as an integrated whole, body and mind and spirit, you could say. So the language we often use in the world of somatics to describe that is the body-mind. One word, body and mind. If you imagine there's no space between that, it takes us from the kind of dualistic idea of the body and mind to the body mind. You could say body, mind, and spirit, but like as we spoke about in one of the emails leading up to this event, it's a bit of a mouthful. So body mind is actually how we describe quite often this idea that the human body, mind, and spirit is a unified whole. Okay, so if you're curious about hearing a bit more about how some of these First Nations people or these indigenous practices give examples of this, you can check out one of my favorite books of all time, Original Wisdom by Robert Wolfe, who talks about the Orang Asli people of Malaysia. Or you can look at Culture in the Senses by Catherine Lynn Gertz, I think that's pronounced, who talks all about the Anglo-speaking peoples of southeastern Ghana. And those are just some wonderful examples. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that this is absolutely nothing new, nothing that you even really need to give. We've now got language for it, which really helps us kind of corral around these ideas and start to innovate around them. But they're nothing new. So like I said, it's this idea of the human as an integrated whole. And really, the etymology of the word somatics has some controversy. So Thomas Hanna is coined for being the originator of naming the field of somatics with a capital S. Of course, the language of somatic was used in medicine for a long time, and soma is a Greek word for the body. Now, somatics talks about the whole body and its aliveness, the fullness of the human experience as experienced as a body, through a body, etc. It has been said that soma means the body in its aliveness, but that actually is considered to be an interpretation of the word of the way the word soma is used in the Greek translation of the Bible. Some language that really points to, I believe, and many others in the world of body psychotherapy would say, points to the idea of what we're getting at with somatics is these German words, Lieb and Körper. So Lieb speaks more to the subjective experiencing body, and Körper speaks to the body as a whole, organs, bones, etc. Both are translations of the word, both translate into the word body, but this word Lieb, the subjective experiencing body, really speaks to what somatics is really all about, or really begins to help us work with. And with our clients and with ourselves. Somatics is really this area that really revolves around remembering ourselves as nature and of nature. or at least it contributes to that movement. And I think that that's a movement we're in right now as a species. I believe that in some ways, this is the kind of zeitgeist of our time, as we see the decline of biodiversity, climate change. We're recognizing that our separation from nature has led to us to move in the direction of our downfall as a species. However, I think there's a shift occurring where we're beginning to reconnect with our place amongst all things and recognize our existence as nature and not of nature. Somatics undoubtedly lends itself to this idea because we're working with the human as organism. We're looking at this from a physiological, psychological, biological perspective, and it gives us this picture of the human as nature and of nature. We're also rediscovering the living spirit that flows through us and all around us. Through somatics, we get many people have, whether secular or spiritual, many people will experience what may be described as spiritual experiences, a sense of wholeness, words like wholeness, of a sense of unity or interconnectedness, which are typically associated with spiritual experience, are often experienced through somatic experiences. Somehow the reconnecting and bringing relationship to our embodied existence, our embodied experience, begins to bridge that divide or that separation that has us feel disconnected, dissociated, and begins to bring us to a place where we feel whole, interconnected. And as I mentioned, so that's somatics. And somatics generally, the field of somatics, is really a countercultural to the individualized, industrialized, and mechanistic structures of modern society. So in some ways, somatics has always been somewhat revolutionary in its kind of felt sense. In some ways, we have a lot of people working in somatics that work around activism, like somatic abolitionism and other areas of looking at social injustices and things like this, and planetary concern and care. So there's this idea of moving from the current structures of our society to perhaps something that may be more life-giving is certainly a topic of exploration in the field of somatics, and is rich and exciting for those of you who are interested in working in those ways or having that kind of impact. So let's just pause here and just check in. Please do feel free. We've only got sort of 20 minutes for this particular session. We're going to open up for kind of a question Q&A towards the end. So maybe I'll keep going and then I'll come back. But just to pause here and just check in the chat. So Sean says, I'm interested in how to view the position of somatic in relation to medical specialized science. Absolutely. Yeah. I forget her name now, but there's an amazing woman who does work with body mind centering, and she is doing great work within the NHS in the UK in modern medicine, working with a very somatic approach, which wouldn't typically have a home there, but she's kind of worked with giving it a different name, and is doing that in medicine, in the world of medical medicine. But yeah, it's a super interesting. How do those worlds bridge? Where are the overlaps, and what can they learn from each other? Modern medicine and the field of somatics. Yeah, that's right. Rusty Body Bainbridge Cohen, the originator of body mind centering, exactly. And the woman I'm talking about in particular, I forget her name, but she runs a company called embodmove, I think it's called, in the UK. Cool. So body mind therapy is the next stop on our bus today. So body mind therapy, a new dawn and a missing piece. Now, body mind therapy, I talk about this here because somatics, the field of somatics, of course, hugely influential on body oriented coaching. Body mind therapy was, as I mentioned in my story earlier, massively influential. So just to kind of take us through some of this, some of the features of body mind therapy, actually, yeah, before I get to that, there was a body-mind therapy, body therapy, or body psychotherapy, body-mind therapy, all synonymous. They grew largely they've been around in a few different places, across the globe. And Germany, Wilhelm Reich was the kind of, you could say, is considered the grandfather of body psychotherapy on the more psychotherapeutic side of the work. And then in the US, in a place called Esalen in the 60s, there was a huge kind of period where body-mind therapy really grew, and lots of different therapies emerged, lots of innovation. Those therapies always remained on the fringes until more recently, where science is really beginning to support these more somatic-based approaches. And these therapies have really come to the fore now. So many of you will probably have heard of somatic experiencing. Somebody here has heard of body-mind centering. You may have heard of things like NARM therapy, or perhaps Hakomi. They become more well known now. But in the world of coaching, and we'll come to this again later, it's really a burgeoning field. I think a little bit like what happened in Esalen in the 60s is sort of happening in the coaching industry now in some ways, but in a less of a concentrated way than Esalen. What it would have been to have been, they used to share hot tubs, all these therapists talking about how to really help people. I think it would have been an amazing time to have been alive. So during that time really was where the beginning of this kind of bottom up movement, you could call it, going from these top down, rational, logical, mental meaning making approaches, which are still primarily the approaches that are used in the helping professions today, to this more bottom up approach. What can we learn from attuning to and listening to our bodies? And body therapists, body mind therapists would agree quite a great deal we can learn from doing that. And for those of you who have had personal experiences, I'm sure you'll agree. Although different strokes for different folks. Some people learn a lot about themselves through working with the body. Others are very, very cerebral, and that's the way they want to work. And that's, absolutely fine, whatever works for each individual. Body mind therapy introduced us to kind of a living systems approach to working with our clients. So really, instead of looking at thought and verbal communication in isolation, what is it to take a look at the whole, to really work with the whole client there at the level of sensation, interoception, proprioception, exteroception, to listening to the felt senses, to working with this idea that all of these parts are all parts of the same whole and are all intricately and intrinsically interconnected, cannot be separated. So if you're working with someone's psychology without acknowledging the role of the body, you're only working with part of the picture. Self-organization and supporting organismic self-regulation is also a big aspect, a big dimension of body-mind therapy. And so this is really about the idea that one of the ways that we're working is to support the organism and support the people's body mind to do what it knows how to do. And how do we support the functioning, the kind of more freedom, flow, freedom of expression, people's improvement of their self-esteem, their confidence, etc., through supporting the body to self-organize and to self-regulate. This idea of present process versus past content. So many body-mind therapies actually focus largely on the present moment, as opposed to going into what happened in the content of the events of the past. And that's very similar to coaching. And so already we begin to see how some of the connections between coaching and these kinds of approaches can be made. But absolutely, exactly as coaching typically looks at the present and how we're shaping the future, unlike some therapies that focus a lot on the past and the events and the details of past memories, past content, these are really looking at present process and past present process. Talk more about process in a moment. Also, the other key part of this for now, and there's sort of many more aspects to body mind therapy that are relevant to body oriented coaching, but another is body awareness and experiential knowing. The idea that bringing body awareness, I mean, we talk about this idea of organismic self-regulation, sometimes simply bringing awareness to the body. If your own awareness locates a misalignment or something that doesn't feel quite right, sometimes just the light of your own awareness in that in that area can actually begin the process of self-organization, self-regulation. A sort of self-adjusting and correcting occurs within the human organism that actually moves people towards, as I said before, more freedom, fulfillment, etc. So and experiential knowing, this is a really important piece. So when it comes to a lot of both coaching and therapy, a lot of the time we're working with what people currently are aware, the way we think about things, right? So we think about our jobs, we think about our relationship when we talk about those things. It's well known in the world of therapy that there's a particular topic of something they call confabulation, which is the idea that quite often we'll recall memories in distorted ways, and we'll often completely make up things to fit what we think it might be happening. So a classic thing in the world of sometimes coaching, when people are beginning to bring the body in, is to say, well, I noticed a moment ago when I asked you that question, you crossed your arms. What do you think was going on for you there? And while that seems like a perfectly valid somatic coaching question, quite often what we find is that is the error of confabulation. People say, oh, well, I guess I was feeling a bit closed off to this idea, but then they're kind of having their best guess at what that might have meant. And what we're working with experiential knowing, and this is very common in body mind therapies, less so in most somatic coaching, but what we're working with in body-oriented coaching is experiential knowing, which is really talking from experience, not about experience, but from it, allowing the insight and awareness to kind of almost emerge and bubble up from that place. And quite often we find deep insights, almost the kind of lock and key solutions to our issues that are right there, held within the wisdom of our own body. A kind of fascinating phenomenon, but for those of you who have that kind of relationship with your body, you may have had that experience. Maybe feel free to drop in the chat if you're familiar with that concept of experiential knowing, and the idea that actually as well, we have, we often say that we have two kinds of communication, verbal and non-verbal, and of the two, the non-verbal tends to be the more honest of the two. And I think the nonverbal communication really, as Ron Kurtz, the founder of the creator of Hakomi, says, the body reveals. The body reveals what's really going on for us, and we can learn to work with that as a coach. So before we move on to the next piece, I wanted to talk to you briefly here about these three models. We can look at this in terms of different ways of doing somatic work. So different ways of working somatically. Nick Totten, in our other event, we speak in much more detail about this, but Nick Totten identified these three ways of working. The first he describes as adjustment, and these involve all the different somatic approaches that work with kind of correcting or adjusting some misalignment or something that's not functioning within the client. Typical traditional body work would typically fit into this, including chiropractic practices, osteopathy, things like that as well. Then we've got discharge. That whole world of kind of trauma work typically is here, especially if it's to do with some sort of release through the body. So a lot of people talk about TRE, and there are other approaches like bioenergetics that work with the body, that work with discharge. Have to be quite careful with these, because actually some of these approaches, in fact, some of these approaches can lend themselves to re-traumatization. And actually the founder of bioenergetics, in fact, it was Wilhelm Reich who described that later, that actually there is a real risk with this, with too much too soon, when we're working toward release, when the goal is release. So more modern trauma therapies in the somatic space are much more gentle, much more non-directive, and kind of go at a slower pace, only as fast as the client's nervous system is ready to go. Now, the model that we're looking at particularly today is process, because this is the one that informs body-oriented coaching the most. So this is the one that says that our role as a practitioner when we're doing somatic work, whether that's body-oriented coaching or another, is any that fit under the process model, is to work more like a steward or a midwife to an intelligent unfolding process. So just like in coaching, how we have the idea that our clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, there's this idea with the process model that we are really working towards supporting what is wanting to emerge, what's intelligently unfolding, really emphasizing this notion of the self-organizing nature of the organism and how we can support that. And you know, when I say the organism, we're not talking in purely biological terms here. We're talking from the perspective that of the human as an integrated whole. So what serves the organism is serving the organism as a whole. That's our thinking mind, our feeling, our emotional experience, our sensate experience. It's all interconnected. And so process is working to support the body mind to do what it knows how to do and what it knows needs to happen next. So the next right step. So I was perhaps a bit premature sharing that link earlier. I just wanted to take this little checkpoint here just to share about this event if anyone wants to attend, or if anyone's keen to actually just jump straight to having a chat. The links there are in the chat there. If somebody wants to have a chat with one of our course consultants, you can talk there. And if you want to attend one of these introduction to body image coaching events to talk a bit more about the course in more detail, that's on Monday.